Welcome to the Women's Heart Health Summit. I'm your host, Dr. Mark Menolascino, Medical Director of the Meno Clinic in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. This is your chance to hear from the international world's experts about helping you to achieve optimal health, optimal vitality, and prevent heart disease. We're joined today by Razi Berry. Razi, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, I'm excited to be here today. This is a topic that I really love for many reasons, and I'm really grateful to be part of it.
Oh, it's our pleasure. Let me tell our viewers a little bit about you, Razi. Razi Berry is the founder and publisher of the award-winning journal Naturopathic Doctor News and Review, ndnr.com, the International Journal of Naturopathic Medicine, and the authoritative naturopathic medical resource for patients, naturopath.net. In 2017, Razi was awarded the Champion of Naturopathic Medicine by the American Association of Naturopathic Physicians, and in 2018 was elected a founding member of the board of the Health and Wellness Business Association. She's also a board member of the Institute for Natural Medicine. Razi lives in Scottsdale, Arizona with her two daughters and writing a book on the science of intuition. We'll share with you how to connect with her, and we're just super fortunate to talk with her today. And we're going to focus on the topic of the emotional causes of heart disease. And again, thank you so much again, Razi, for joining us.
Oh, it's great to be here. I have my own little story about heart disease to share. So it's a little bit different than the focus of this, but I remember learning just a few years ago that heart disease was the leading cause of death for women. And I know that you talk about that in your book and in the work you do, but that came as a surprise to me. But when I was a teenager, I was dying of heart failure. I was actually in the hospital with heart failure. And it was so severe that the family priest came in and did the last rites ceremony. So for listeners that don't know what that is, it's sort of like when you're raised in the Catholic tradition that I was raised in. When you're born, you're baptized. And when you die, it's like a baptism of death. And so it was really serious. And the cause of my heart failure was from an eating disorder. And I remember the doctor was saying to my mother while I was lying in the hospital bed, this is a shame because she's doing it to herself. And what happened next isn't really important for today's interview, but I had a transformative experience and I healed. So I healed without, like the medical intervention, there really wasn't much you can do for heart failure. But I healed. And some people call that a near-death experience. People around my church family said that God healed me, but I don't really have the answer to that. But what I did realize in that experience is that, and then learning that the number one cause of death in women is heart disease, I realized there are many ways that we break our own hearts. I mean, literally heart disease, heart attack, there's all the constellation of different types of heart disease is really a broken heart. And so I'd like to talk today about some of those emotional causes, because after that happened to me throughout my life, when I became a publisher of a naturopathic medicine journal that focuses on case studies, so this is less about scientific research and more about actual cases that doctors see every day in the practice of natural medicine, is that there's always this body-mind component. And I very particularly say body-mind instead of mind-body, because most of it happens in the body, just mediated by the mind.
Well, that's such a great way to think about what we're doing in medicine. I love the journal that you do and the case studies, and they're real world examples of real people and what they did and how they got better. And I think that tells us so much. This idea of dying of a broken heart and feeling things in the pit of your stomach and events being gut-wrenching, that whole gut, heart, mind, we're really trying all three of those together now, aren't we?
Yeah, I call them the three hearts, the heart in your brain, the heart in your chest, and the heart in your stomach. Some people call them brains, but because they're all organs of emotion and they're all endocrine organs. It was just in the 80s, I believe it was, that the heart was reclassified as an endocrine organ, meaning that it produces hormones and even neuropeptides that we thought once were just coming from the brain. And so I think these old adages of like someone having a broken heart or an open heart or hard-hearted or cold-hearted or butterflies in the stomach, really, I think the people and even physicians of antiquity were onto something. Also, the fact that we have sort of lost our way with regard to looking at the heart solely as a mechanical pump.
Mm-hmm.
Now, a doctor from Harvard University, Dr. Bremer, published in 1932, I think it was,
Wow.
that he did the mathematical, computations of this and found that really with the viscosity of blood and the size of most of the capillaries in our system and just the heart in itself, that would be akin to lifting 100-pound weight 100 miles, 100 miles up in the air consistently without getting fatigued. So a lot of some of the research that ensued from there, most of it happening in Europe, was showing that the heart is really this regulatory channel. Now, this doctor that I'm talking about, Dr. Bremer, he observed in embryological studies that the blood circulates in an embryo before the heart starts pumping.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's this idea that the gases and the solids inside the blood have sort of this vortex, this self-propelling nature, and the heart is more a regulatory device instead of an actual mechanical pump. And when we look at some of the causes, the emotional causes of heart disease, I think that we're really going to find that to be true.
Well, I love how you think, Razi. I've always appreciated that when I hear you speak or in a conversation, the way you're able to tie all of these different things together like that. And, as you were talking, I was thinking about the vagus nerve. Can you tell us a little bit about the vagus nerve? They call it the wanderer because it goes all through the body and maybe what really connects the heart, the brain, and the gut together.
Yeah, so the vagus nerve starts somewhere in your brainstem and travels out, as you said. It kind of connects the heart, brain, and the gut together. And that's why, at least the research of heart math believes that the state of being coherent is so important, to have your heart in your head and in your chest and in your gut together, because this vagus nerve really regulates the up and down crosstalk between the heart, the brain, and the gut. And so some of these hormones that we thought were just produced in the brain, such as like oxytocin or serotonin or even ANF and some of like vasopressin, we're finding are being created in these distal parts of the body, like the gut and the heart, and that they send their signals maybe through the vagus nerve to help us in a fight or flight state, or attachment, or even sexuality. I'm really fascinated by vasopressin, if I can kind of dive.
Sure. Tell us a bit more about that.
So vasopressin is a peptide that regulates osmolarity. So it regulates the solids, so to speak, inside a solution like your blood. So sugars and other carbohydrates and just all the minerals and vitamins that are in your blood that your body has to pump through and to get to every organ in your body. Well, vasopressin regulates that, but it also is associated with aggression and in mating. So what studies have found is that vasopressin really affects the heart and the blood vessels through constricting and releasing of some of these hormones of aggression. And they found in males, vasopressin can cause like anti-empathetic behavior. It can cause feelings of being territorial. And in that sense, it can impact monogamous relationships, meaning it's kind of when the male, and I don't mean to sound sexist, but that's what the studies are about, when the male is sort of like, this is my territory, this is my tribe, this is my woman. But in women, it causes more pro-social bonding. And the fact that the vasopressin is also released during times of stress, it can cause what is called sterile inflammation. And so the body, like your immune system, it kind of can detect when there's a pathogen there, right? And it will release cytokines and just any kind of immune function. But there is a type of, I have a note here because I keep forgetting the actual term of it, but they're called danger-associated molecular patterns or DAMPs.
Damps.
Yeah, and basically when there is a type of stress that in absence of a pathogen, your body releases these stress hormones as well. Now, the body has this check and balance system when it releases like corticosteroids and to help kind of get you out of that. But what we find, and I am going somewhere with this with regard to like emotional distress.
This is great. No, please continue.
What we find is, so in a healthy individual, you know, you're under this stress, and so these steroids come and they help mediate those inflammatory responses. But just the way we can become sensitive to insulin or insensitive, we can become desensitized to this check and balance system.
Right.
And so what it looks like is the reason that stress can cause depression and pain and inflammatory processes is because this check and balance system gets broken. And I think it's the reason where some of the research is going is why childhood trauma so specifically can cause dis-ease later on in life, meaning obesity and blood sugar issues and even cancers. So,
you're right.
So the vagus nerve is an important part of that because these peptides, they talk to each other through the vagus nerve in many instances. And that's why when you're in a stressful situation or you have an argument with someone that you care about, you know, your heart beats faster, your blood pressure changes, your stomach motility changes and can cause constipation or diarrhea. And so as much as we know and are learning from all the wonderful experts and in your book, it's also humbling to see how little we really do understand or take into our daily life the impact that emotions do have on our physical body.
Well, I love how you share that about this regulatory pathway and how it's not so much the response as the lack of regulation of the response and being able to lose those controls of the system. And maybe that's what's happening so much with this inflammatory cascade. And, you know, you mentioned oxytocin earlier. Could you share with our viewers a little bit more information on oxytocin? Because I don't think a lot of people know what that is. A couple more speakers have spoke on it. And it's fascinating. I know you're one of the experts in that as well, too.
Well, I like to call myself a student of it, but and we're learning more and more about oxytocin. So oxytocin is a neuropeptide that is often called the love hormone, or the cuddling hormone, but we're learning it's involved with a lot more than that, which is really just mind-boggling. But so we now know that oxytocin is, of course, produced in the gut. And so a healthy microbiome is really important for your heart health as well. But it's also been shown that oxytocin is released from your heart and all the major valves as well. So there's not a single site in the heart that hasn't been shown to release oxytocin. And so again, to go back to sort of the old-fashioned terms that people use about something being heartfelt or to have a cold heart or a hard heart, it really rings true. So oxytocin is super important with maternal bonding also. So it's released during breastfeeding, and it's released during childbirth, it's released during orgasm. And in men, there's also that release of vasopressin where they feel aggression towards other males, but more pro-social behavior towards the female. And we're finding that oxytocin and vasopressin act on the same receptor sites. So it's really changing what we thought about oxytocin. It now looks that oxytocin behaves, it gets some signals from the vasopressin that is released. And so it's just like in genetics when switches can be turned off and on, these hormones of love and aggression and bonding and attachment seem to really be more, I guess, objective than we once thought.
As a student of all of this, and I know you get so much that comes across your desk as a publisher, and you're always on the pulse of so many different things. It must be exciting for you to see how things that you felt intuitively or that you've wondered if the connections are there, you're now starting to see the science support those connections.
Yes, that's true. I've been really kind of geeking out on the subject of intuition, and from a less of like a psychic phenomenon. I believe in that phenomenon, but I myself, I'm not psychic, so I know nothing about that. But I'm very intuitive, and I think as humans, we all are. But in this modern world, we've sort of lost touch with that. We sort of I think this is important for the women listening. I'm sure there are many women listening that feel like they have these hunches about how they should live their life, how they should treat their body, how they should eat, how they should relate. And they don't always follow that. And instead, they sort of outsource that to, doctors, teachers, gurus, and don't really listen within. And so I've been looking deeply into the physiology of what intuition really is. And it's really what I call a physio-conscious experience, because we look at what Candace Pert, who is an amazing pharmacologist and cell biologist, said that the body is the subconscious mind, meaning these peptides, and we talked about some of them, oxytocin and vasopressin, for instance, and then like ANF, which regulates kidney and blood flow and blood pressure, and all, which is also produced by the heart. These kind of are a link between our consciousness and our physical body. And I think what happens is women are often told to really think through things, either through therapy or other talk therapies, and work things out in their head, and totally disregard what's happening phenomenologically in their body. And so what intuition I have found really is, and the heart is the main player in this, Mark, is that it is partly this interoceptive sensibility. So it's this ability, and that's the scientific term, it's the ability to sense what our internal organ state is. So it's changes in temperature, changes in blood pressure, changes in skin conductance, like even goosebumps, for instance.
Sure.
They seem like they're these spiritual tests or spiritual signs of something, but they're really happening in our body. And if we could look deep inside, our heart is regulating these gases and these hormones, and they're sending messages to our brain and to our gut through the vagus nerve and in other ways, like through the lymph, for instance. And the heart has really shown to be an important part of this. We have a heart field that can be monitored for sure through like an EEG, right, or an EKG. But it's been measured that you can actually feel that as much as 4 or 5 feet from outside the body. And that's why sometimes when you're in relationship with certain people, you kind of feel that state of coherence. You tend to become entrained. So you can be around a person who's angry or stressed all the time, and it affects you through that heart field. And this sounds woo-woo, but it's actually very scientific. And then if we look at how that can affect these hormones of emotion, like serotonin, oxytocin, vasopressin, we see these physiological changes in the body too. The heart has been shown to be able to actually receive and process information 1.5 seconds before the brain does. And they did this through, there's been many studies in business settings and in relationship settings. The one that's really fascinating was used in kind of like a roulette situation. And so they took a group of entrepreneurs and blindly told them that they were doing like a gambling test to see how correct they could be. But really what they were doing is they're measuring through their heart rate variability, and their skin conductance, and through EEG, how their body responded to whether it would be red or black. And so they found that, yes, the average person can detect things as many as 4 seconds before they happen, but the heart gets it 1.5 seconds prior to that. And I think that's what the reason we traditionally have been telling people to listen to their heart, because I think from a physiological point of view, we've always known that the heart has its own intelligence.
You've said so many great things, and you mentioned earlier Heart Math, and I actually went there 25 years ago to the facility. And what their leader, Dr. Childers, did, he set a magnet down like what we did in high school, and he spread iron filings around it, and it made these perfect Gaussian curved circles between the north and south part of the magnet. And the earth does the same thing. And our heart, every time it beats, you have this inflow and outflow of calcium and potassium, and it creates that same magnetic field. And it is measurable and it is actionable. That may be why two people, when they come close, they feel connected, or where they come close and don't feel connected. It's those energies kind of matching. You know, a lot of women that come to see me as the expert will say, oh my gosh, you have 27 years of experience. I'm so excited to be here. I tell them I do, but the smartest person in the room is your intuition.
I love that.
Let's teach you how to trust it. But you had mentioned these adverse childhood experiences and what's happened early in life and trauma affecting later health. Cancer, heart disease, liver disease has been linked to almost every disease. Do you think that affects a woman's ability to trust that intuition or to listen to it? And how would you recommend people to get better at listening to their own intuition? Do you have any self-care hints, please?
I do. So I think you're right on target. I think that that's a big reason why we don't trust our intuition. I also think part of the reason is we're not really taught how our bodies actually work. So we don't trust our body. I know that I grew up, you know, every time I had a cold or a sneeze, my mom, you know, she was just a loving, very protective mother, sent us to the doctor and we got some sort of shot or elixir or pill. And it's almost like we're taught that we can't trust our body. And then, you know, fertility and pregnancy and childbirth, they've all been so medicalized. And again, teaching women that we can't really trust our bodies. And so I do have some tips of how you can really settle back into your body and start paying attention. So we talked about heart math, and a lot of their recent research is still on the heart, but going more towards the earth and the sun and the biofield that it creates. And one thing I failed to mention when I talked about the heart not really pumping blood, but being more of like a regulatory station of the blood has a very unique order to it. It's not like just, you know, water flowing through a tube. It's like they found that there is a specific arrangement that causes a cyclical, almost like a vortex, just the way in nature a river moves through because of this vortex, right? And not because there's some pump on the other side pumping it through. And so what some of this research from Heart Math, and then if you take Dr. Dr. Gerald Pollack's work with the fourth phase of water, and blood is mostly water, you see that when you're outside, barefoot on the earth in the sun, your body almost becomes like a battery, because you've got the earth's biofield affecting your heart field and your brain field. And then the sun, they've shown with the hydrophilic nature of the water in the blood, it propels the blood through. And that's why another reason why sunlight. So one of the things I do every single day to help improve not only my health, but also my intuitive sensitivity is to go outside, rain or shine. I do live in Phoenix. It makes it easier, but I get outside barefoot in the sun with as much skin exposed to the sun as possible, and really set that sort of charge for the day, so I'm more attuned to my environment.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. I know a lot of people like this earthing concept, and a lot of people that come to visit me that actually go camping, they say that when they do sleep on the ground, they just wake up differently. There's some connection that they have, and you know, it's part of our environment like that.
Yeah, I agree. And another thing I think is really important, sort of akin to that, is we now wear shoes that are hard-soled or high heels, and our feet barely touch the earth. And so not only with that field, but also walking on uneven surfaces, it stimulates these proprioceptive muscles that stimulate many areas of our brain and help us to kind of understand where we are in the world. That's what proprioception is. And it's sort of something that we've atrophied because, again, we're walking on concrete all the time, or in high heels, or in thick-soled shoes. So we're less in touch with where we are in our environment. And I think that is the reason why some of these the very dissociative nature of many of these diseases, like obesity, for instance, I feel like we don't really feel like we're fully embodied in who we are, because if we were, we wouldn't be able to make choices that weren't loving towards ourselves. We wouldn't be able to be breaking our own heart. So to walk on uneven surfaces is something I do, and I make my daughters do all the time. In fact, I put this pile of river rock in my yard, so we walk barefoot on that just as a practice. And another really, really simple but important thing I've done to help strengthen my intuition really is by really protecting my olfactory sense. Your sense of smell is taking in so much data, and there's so much fascinating research. I'm really excited to be including it in my book, but we've got these organs of olfaction between our nose and our brain that not only detect just if something smells delicious or not, but also can gather information like what is the sex of a person or animal in our environment, what is their fertility, what is their age, and these have been studied in animal studies. They've studied rats. I hate talking about animal studies, but they've taken rats and bred them for multiple generations without really any contact with any other animal or predator or mate or anything. And when they did this and they sort of bred all of that out, then they would introduce various chemicals that induce chemosensing, and the rat would change their posturing. So it could be a female rat, and they introduced a male predator, and just the scent of one, and they would automatically know that it was a predator without ever seeing this animal. Or they would bring in like another adult that was within like mating age, and they would show those types of posturing, like mating postures. But then they would introduce a young rat that was not of that age, and the test rat wouldn't show those postures. So there's so much information that we get from the world around us through these chemosenses that go much beyond just if something smells good. And we mask those all throughout the day by keeping the air so full of air fresheners and wearing deodorants and masking our own pheromones and lighting candles. And I found that when I've really eliminated all of that, I have a much keener sense of smell. And we know it's important for cognition because one of the tests for dementia, as you know, is a smell test.
Yes.
So there's a lot that we're learning about olfaction and how it can really help you get data from the world around you and make better decisions.
Well, Razi, I'm having this image of you walking out on your river rocks in your bare feet with your daughters and then wondering how weird their mom is, but actually loving it. And I'm, for myself, being fortunate to be in this clean, beautiful place. What about for our listeners that are in New York City, in LA, in one of these major cities where even finding grass to walk barefoot on is almost impossible?
Yeah.
What are some suggestions you'd have for our city dwellers? How can they get some of that, and how can they detoxify from that type of stress?
Well, definitely bringing plants into your environment is really important. There was the big NASA study in the 80s showing that plants can remove all types of solvents, hexane, all sorts of solvents from the air. So if you're in a city, please have plants all around you. I also like to bring in a lot of crystals. That sounds a little bit woo-woo, but there is a lot of science behind the conductivity, of course, of crystals and how it can really help elevate the mood and just surrounding yourself with
feel good.
Yeah, when you feel good, like I'm all about placebo. I love that. So however it can feel good. And if you can't get your feet on the bare earth, if you can't go to find a patch of grass in the parking lot in your lunch hour or something like that, you can still, take off your shoes sometimes. I keep sometimes rocks down beneath me and rub my foot against them. You can do acupressure foot massages to help stimulate those areas, and cross body exercises. So any exercise where you cross the midline, like touching the opposite hand and foot together or standing on one foot, that helps strengthen that functional connectivity between different areas of the brain. And so if you're in a city, you can do things like that.
Razi, how about when you travel? I know you go to a lot of conferences, and when you travel with hotels and that, what are some of the tricks you do while you're traveling for yourself?
Yeah, so I always travel with a couple crystals just to create, that nice energy in the room. And I always bring a beeswax candle. I'm trying to see if I have it around me. Beeswax candles naturally ionize the air, and there's no scent except for this pleasant honey scent. So I always carry that with me whenever I travel. I always take like a blanket or a scarf. I usually carry a silk scarf, and I cover the TV just so I don't have that energy in the room. And I do my little exercises in the hotel room. I stand on one foot when I'm brushing my teeth. I try to turn off all the electric lights and open the windows to get as much sunlight in as possible. And one of the first things I do is I find a store and buy water that's bottled in glass. I think that's really important when you're traveling, because plastics really, in the bottled water, we know so much about how BPA affects your hormones, but it affects your neurotransmitters as well. And so I try to avoid plastic when I travel.
Well, I know when I've traveled to a conference with you, I see you going to like the Whole Foods and getting your own food. And that's one real smart thing. I think I learned that from you, actually.
Oh.
Is the first stop I go to is a natural food store when I go to a conference. We're fortunate the conferences we go to, they're very conscious about the food, but
Yes.
but getting clean food, clean air, clean water is such a key. The principles of naturopathics, I think for those viewing that don't know much about naturopathy, the training is very similar to MDs. The first 2 years are the same type of book training that an MD gets. The clinicals are more focused on nutrition. But just the overall principles of naturopathics and naturopathy is such more of a whole person based philosophy of health. And I hope the MDs learn something from the naturopaths in their training. And there are more medical schools that are incorporating nutrition in their training. I think I got 20 minutes of nutrition disguised as rickets and scurvy, but they didn't even talk about nutrition. And Dr. Joel Kahn was on saying that in the cardiology fellowship boards, on the board exam, there's not a single nutrition question.
Wow.
So in the study preparation, there's not a single section that the cardiologists have to prepare on nutrition, which is a real shame. So how can the naturopaths teach the doctors? What can they teach the allopaths? And it seems like a lot of my patients are coming to me really already primed. They're learning from a lot of places, from things like our summit, from editorials such as what you're working on, journals, and from having seen practitioners that know nutrition. Where do you see this moving towards, Razi?
Well, I think that naturopathy, before it was actually a type of medicine, it was just a philosophy. So it came together in the late 1800s when different types of healers, some osteopaths, some medical doctors, some they weren't called physical therapists or chiropractors back then, but they were more like manual therapists, kind of came together with this sense of what was called vitalism, this idea that the body is innately self-healing. And they felt that the new wave back then of modern medicine was taking practitioners out of that. So they came together and formed naturopathy, and that kind of split off to becoming, in some instances, a medical paradigm of a medical school, and in other ways, just people who practice naturopathy that aren't actually physicians. But the main principle of naturopathy is really one of nature cure, that nature provides everything that we have to maintain our health. Now, that's not to say that emergency medicine is not important, or modern medicine does not have its place, because it does. But just this idea that we have what is called the vital force, and in naturopathic medicine, it's called the vis. It's a Latin term for the vital force, vis medicatrix naturae. So it really says that what we need to do is not only find the root cause, which is part of it, and I'm so glad to see that philosophy has really taken many types of medicine by storm to embrace that, but it's also removing the obstacle to cure, which I think is so important. It's this idea that it's not only what you need to give. It's not just like, I'm going to give you this supplement instead of this prescription, but it's also, what do we need to remove from your life, from your food, from your environment, that is in the way, that is the obstacle to the cure. And that's just a very small but very profound tenet that I think is important in so many ways. And you think of a tree. If you don't prune a tree, it's not going to bear more fruit. So sometimes we have to look at, what do we need to remove, and not just what do we need to give.
Boy, I love that. And you're so right about this whole medicine moving to root cause. As an internist, I prescribe medications. I like acute care med. When you're sick, if I have pneumonia, I'm going to take the antibiotic. If my heart artery's blocked, I'm going to do the procedure to open it. But our whole goal as doctors is to get people never to need those procedures.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of what you're talking about in this root cause. There's so much going on in medicine that's reactionary, and that's why we have this chronic illness burden.
Yeah. And if I could just also say,
please.
because naturopathic doctors aren't opposed to pharmaceuticals, and depending on where they practice, some of them have that in their scope and they do use them, and others can't, so they don't, and they refer as they should. But there's also what is called the naturopathic therapeutic order. And so what that really looks at is it's like this pyramid of doing, first do no harm. And so what it looks at is what is going to support the body's vital force. And in some cases, maybe it's a pharmaceutical, and, to give the body a rest and to let other things come to a head or whatever. But overall, it's so it's not just like anti-medicine, but it's more of like this really unique perspective, this lens to look through to see what is going to support the patient so the patient can heal.
And I trained in Phoenix, which I love, the Arizona area. It's amazingly beautiful, the desert and then the mountain part of it. And I worked with Andrew Weil a little bit, and someone came in and said, "Oh, I had pneumonia and the doctor cured me." And I heard him say, "Well, no, I didn't cure you, and the antibiotic didn't cure you. The medication just gave your body enough of a rest for it to fix itself."
It's fantastic.
And I love that type of thinking about acute care medicine. And maybe that's really why, if you do everything else to support your health, you're going to bounce back faster. You're not going to get as sick. And this kind of self-care medicine is really what we're trying to embody. And women really shouldn't have heart disease. And they shouldn't die from heart attacks, because if we do the right testing and they incorporate a lot of the things that you're talking about, then they won't. You talk about intuition, and the heart really has her own intuition, doesn't she?
Absolutely. I
think how do you see that, Razi? How do you visualize that, if I may ask?
Yeah, so I see, all of our senses are so magnificent, and I just wish we had time to talk about all of them, but I see the heart as really this hub that takes it in and processes in a very physio-conscious way everything that we take in. Like it was recently identified that the human iris has a cryptochrome that we thought only animals had. So when animals know how to, leave for the winter and come back for the spring or summer, and have a sense like they said in the wild, dogs always face a certain way when they go to the bathroom, and there's just all sorts of amazing things that animals do to understand their place in the world, or to get at the right place at the right time. And we found that humans have that same cryptochrome, that same protein. And so I think that through all these neat things that we're learning about olfaction and touch and hearing, and just how our senses can do so much more than just see, smell, hear, taste, and feel. I think the heart is sort of the hub that transmutes that into more of a coherent mind and body. And I think that that's why you say so astutely, women should not be dying of heart disease, but they are. And I'm saying that means they're dying of broken hearts. And that's because we're divorced from our true nature. We aren't living in an embodied way. We're very dissociated. We're looking at what are other people telling us to do, telling us how to act, telling us what to eat, telling us how to think. And it's caused a lot of, both inflammation and just depression, which becomes a real cycle. They tested this cerebrospinal fluid of people with depression who have attempted suicide, and they had those non-pathogenic inflammatory cytokines like 5 times more than just the average person did.
I did my master's studies on depression and how the depression and immune system work together. And, if you are depressed, are you really more likely to get sick or develop cancer? And we proved that in a clinical model in people and in the test tube with natural killer cells. Your immune system is definitely different. I think of depression as an inflammatory disorder. And what's interesting, if I'd like to ask you to pick your brain about sleep a little bit, because the number one thing people take for sleep is an antihistamine, which is actually an anti-inflammatory as well. So many people struggle with sleep, and you're talking about these clock genes, how people have this daily rhythm, weekly, monthly rhythm for women, seasonal rhythm. What are some of the strategies to get good sleep for women that you would love to share with us, if I may ask?
Yeah, so this is my Achilles heel, Mark. Sleep is the place that I need to do the most work on, because the nature of the work I do, I end up working really late. But I can say when I sleep the best is when I eat according to my cravings. And I don't mean like chocolate cake and things like that, but when I really, I think when I keep my blood sugar regulated throughout the day, that is really important. If I somehow miss my morning sun, it sets me off. It really does. It sets me off. So I make sure that wherever I am, even if I'm like in a city, I make sure I sit outside drinking my tea and getting that morning sun. And that's really, really important.
That's great.
And I think finally, the nights that I work too late, like on my computer, are definitely the nights that I don't sleep well. So I feel like probably people have covered this better than I have. But I also so I'm a single mom with 2 amazing kids, and we turn our nighttime into, we laugh a lot. Like that's when we get silly and and I feel like that the more I laugh in the evening, the better sleep I have, for sure.
That's great. And if I may ask, I know for my kids, we had rules as far as the electronics and trying to do things, and working late, you just pretty much don't have a choice. But I find the routine is what's so key, is having a set time to go to bed, a set time to get up. And for a lot of people, just having something as a routine, even if you do stay up late, to have that set routine, or like a special ritual like you do with your tea in the sun in the morning, kind of gives you that. It's its own routine in itself. And so it's something the body looks forward to, the spirit looks forward to, the body, the mind does.
You just reminded me of a little ritual I used to do with my kids, and we kind of grew out of it. And thank you for reminding me. So what we used to do before bed is we went outside and looked at the moon just to see what phase the moon was in. I'm just so mesmerized by the moon. And the moon has such an amazing connection between the earth and even our physiology, right? There's a lot there. And so we would go outside and look at the moon and come inside, and we would light a candle and sing a song and then blow out the candle and go to bed. It was lovely. And you just reminded me of that.
Well, I hear people talk about the power of the moon, and some people dismiss it. Well, I've been fishing Alaska 30 times, and where I go in Alaska, the tide shifts 32 feet. So
wow,
the moon has quite a bit of power.
Yeah.
But that's a great ritual. Those little things that you can put in, and especially for those listening with kids, we like to have a dance party after dinner, about an hour after dinner.
I love it.
Up and everybody dance and be silly and be loose. And it's something everybody looks forward to. And it just kind of that's our transition from being serious and doing school work or doctor work and going into play mode, and then kind of the wind down mode.
That's great. I love to dance.
So
everyone dance.
I'm sure you get asked this all the time, and I've been putting everybody on the spot by asking the same question.
Okay.
What's the best diet? Because I'm sure this is something, is it paleo, is it vegan, is it keto, is it intermittent fasting? If someone asks you your elevator soundbite to that, how do you reply to that, Razi?
Yeah, I think that you just eat as close to the earth as you can, and you just listen to your body. I don't believe in cutting out any whole food group. So I'm going to be maybe unpopular here, but whether it's grains or wheat or meat, or dairy, I don't believe in cutting it out. But when I drink dairy, I get raw dairy. And almost any community, even the cities now, have co-ops where people rally together to find raw dairy, or somebody has a connection to get really great eggs or some local meat, or at least meat that you knew was raised on a pasture. So, sometimes I'll go weeks without eating dairy or red meat. And other times I will be craving lamb chops 3 days in a row. So I just really listen to my body. And then on top of that, I don't believe in this idea of everything in moderation. I think it's a lie we tell ourselves that has gotten out of control. when there was only a few packaged foods around, or maybe when TV was only on until 11 p.m. and then it turned off. Then moderation.
When was that?
Yeah, I'm really aging myself. Moderation was, different, but now it's like there's junk food available, can be delivered to your house 24 hours a day, and the TV never stops, and bad news is on every channel 24/7. And so there's more fast food places. I had a friend of mine one time saying, well, I take my daughter, once a month to McDonald's because I don't want her to feel deprived. And I just think that's taking it too far. I think that's just not true. Everything in moderation. No, do I ever eat a cookie or barbecue potato chips? Absolutely. But I don't plan it in, and I don't hate myself when I do it. I just live by listening to my body.
Well, you have such a good wisdom of experience, the way you share honestly what you really do and why you think the way you do, and that passion. I just have always admired that for you.
Thank you.
It's hard as a super mom, and I use that term kind of loosely because every mom is a super mom. Okay. And it's about being the best you can be, whether you're a mom, a CEO, a manager of McDonald's, a janitor, a doctor. For me, it's not so much what you do as how you bring yourself to that position. Do you do the things that you can do for yourself to show up 100%? And there's so many sabotagers in our world that detract from that. And you've really shared with us a lot of great ideas about how to stand in your space and to understand yourself and to look into that. Razi, I think there's a lot of people viewing that would love to connect with you. How do they find you if someone wanted to learn more about the work you're doing or get connected with you?
Thanks. Well, you can find me on Facebook. I have a really fun group that I started recently called Love is Medicine, where we explore the ideas of relationships and love in all forms and how it impacts health. And so I'm having a lot of fun there. So you can go to Love is Medicine on Facebook.
Great.
On Instagram, I'm just Razi.Berry. That is my real name. Razi Berry is my real name. And, if you connect with me in one of those places, my website where my blog is naturalpath.net. And if you connect with me there, you know, I'm working on a book on the physiology of intuition.
Great.
So you can learn more about that.
And for everybody viewing, it's Razi, Razi.Berry, Berry. And I definitely encourage you to connect with her. I love the Love is Medicine.
Thanks.
And you have so much good stuff to share with people, and look forward to your book. Razi Berry, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much.